I want you to picture something for me. A girl standing in the rain, 20 years old. Everything she owns is in a single black garbage bag at her feet. Her shoes are soaked through. She has not eaten since yesterday morning. She has $11 in her coat pocket and nowhere to sleep tonight. Now picture what she is looking at. A hillside. 3 acres of scrub grass and broken limestone on the edge of a town that has never once been kind to her. At the base of the hill, half hidden by overgrown brush and decades of fallen rock, is the sealed mouth of a cave. The entrance collapsed in 1994. Nobody has been inside since. That girl is me. My name is Nora Calloway, and this pile of rubble on a ridge nobody wants is my entire inheritance. They laughed when they told me about it. The director of Harrow Hill Children's Home, the woman who had watched over me for 12 years with the warmth of a filing cabinet, she actually laughed. A short, dry sound. Like I had told a joke she had heard before. She handed me a garbage bag and a deed and said, "Your grandfather was a strange old man, Nora. He left you his empire." She made the word empire sound like something you'd scrape off your shoe. What nobody in that room understood, what nobody in this whole town understood, was what was inside that cave. My grandfather had spent 20 years preparing for exactly this moment. He had built something in the dark. He had hidden something that the most dangerous people in Drayfield would have destroyed without a second thought, and he had left it all to me. What I found inside that mountain didn't just save my life. It freed women who had been forgotten. It put 3 people in federal prison. And it proved once and completely that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person is underestimate them. This is my story, and it starts the way all the best ones do. With a door slamming shut, Harrow Hill Children's Home sits at the northern edge of Drayfield, behind a wrought iron fence and a row of oak trees that are the most dignified thing about the place. From the outside it looks respectable. Red brick, clean windows, a small garden by the front gate that the older kids are made to tend on Saturday mornings. From the inside it is something else entirely. I arrived at Harrow Hill when I was 8 years old. My mother, Clara Calloway, had been reported missing 6 months earlier. No note, no goodbye, no trail. She was simply there one day and gone the next, and the state of Drayfield decided that her daughter belonged in an institution while the county decided what to do with her. The county never decided anything. I stayed for 12 years. The director of Harrow Hill was a woman named Maren Voss. She was 53 years old, slim, precise, with silver-streaked hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her expression flat. She wore the same navy blazer every weekday and carried a clipboard like a weapon. She had been running Harrow Hill for 18 years, and the town of Drayfield thought she was a saint. The Rotary Club gave her an award once, Community Leader of the Year. There is a photograph of her accepting it in the lobby of the home, smiling the careful smile of someone who has spent a long time practicing it. Her deputy was a man named Roland Fitch. He managed intake, placements, and what Voss called extended transfer arrangements, which meant that when a child left Harrow Hill for reasons nobody quite explained, it was Fitch who signed the paperwork. He was quieter than Voss, smaller, the kind of man who stands slightly behind the important person and watches everything with careful eyes. In 12 years at Harrow Hill, I never once heard Roland Fitch raise his voice. That frightened me more than anything. I learned fast, at Harrow Hill, that there were 2 categories of children. There were the ones with family, cousins, grandparents, somebody, who came to visit on holidays and sent cards on birthdays and created a small, bright thread of accountability, connecting the child to the world outside. And there were the ones with nobody, the ones nobody was looking for. I was in the second category. So were the girls who disappeared. I noticed the first time when I was 13. A girl named Paulette, 14 years old, quiet and funny, who had been at Harrow Hill 2 years and who made the best scrambled eggs on Saturday mornings and who had a laugh that filled a room. She was simply gone one Monday. Fitch said she had been transferred to a placement facility in the next county, closer to a distant relative who had come forward. I asked to write to her. Fitch said he would pass on my address. She never wrote back. Over the next 7 years, I counted 6 more. 6 girls, all in that second category, all with nobody looking for them, all transferred suddenly, all unreachable afterward. I asked about them. I was told to focus on my own future. I kept my head down and I counted the days and I waited. On the night of my 20th birthday, exactly at midnight, because Maren Voss was the kind of person who waits for the clock, there was a knock on my dormitory door. She was standing in the hallway in her navy blazer, clipboard in hand, as if this were simply the next item on her agenda. "State funding concluded 60 seconds ago," she said. "You are legally an adult. Pack what you need. There is a bed needed in this room by morning." I said. "It is the middle of the night," she said. "There is a 24-hour diner on Merchant Street. I suggest you start there." She held out a black garbage bag. Then, as an afterthought, and I could see it was an afterthought because she glanced at it with mild irritation, as if it were a task she had almost forgotten, she produced a thin manila envelope from under her clipboard. "Legal correspondence regarding your grandfather's estate," she said. "Walter Calloway. He passed 3 months ago. You are listed as his sole heir." She paused. "I would not get your hopes up. The man was, by all accounts, not entirely well." She dropped the envelope onto my pillow and walked away. I stood in the dark hallway of Harrow Hill Children's Home, garbage bag in hand, and I listened to the sound of her footsteps fading. Then I sat back down on the edge of my bed and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from a lawyer named Theodore Briggs and a deed to something called Holloway Cave. I spent what remained of that night in the 24-hour diner on Merchant Street, exactly as Maren Voss had suggested, which was the last piece of advice of hers I would ever follow. I ordered a cup of coffee and sat in a corner booth and read the lawyer's letter 3 times. Theodore Briggs maintained an office on the 2nd floor of a building that also housed a tax preparation service and a notary public who only worked Tuesdays. His waiting room smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, and had 3 mismatched chairs arranged around a table covered in magazines from 4 years ago. He was a round, unhurried man in his late 60s, with a patchy gray beard and reading glasses perched at the end of his nose. He greeted me with the tired warmth of someone who has delivered disappointing news so many times that it no longer causes him particular distress. "Miss Calloway," he said, settling into his chair. "I appreciate you coming in promptly. I want to be straightforward with you about the nature of your grandfather's estate." He placed a folder on the desk between us. Walter Calloway was not a wealthy man. He was, in the opinion of most people in Drayfield, an eccentric one. He lived alone on Ashford Ridge for the last 20 years of his life, rarely came into town, and was known to have, he paused carefully, strongly held views about certain prominent individuals in the county. I said, "What did he leave me?" 3 acres of land on Ashford Ridge," Briggs said. "Unimproved. No utilities, no road access to speak of, assessed by the county at minimal value." He opened the folder and slid a deed across the desk. "The primary geological feature on the property is a cave system, locally known as Holloway Cave, which was sealed by a significant rockslide in 1994. The county has assessed the cost of clearing the entrance at roughly $12,000. There is no evidence of anything inside of value." "A cave," I said. "A sealed cave," Briggs confirmed, with the gentle gravity of a man delivering a diagnosis. He folded his hands. "I want to be honest with you, Miss Calloway. There are back taxes owed on the property, not large, but they begin accruing to you immediately. The land is not easily sold given the condition. I would not expect this to change your circumstances in any significant way. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about 12 years, about Marin Voss and her clipboard and her navy blazer, about 6 girls who disappeared and never wrote back, about a garbage bag and a diner booth and $11 in my coat. I picked up the deed. I said, "Thank you, Mr. Briggs." He was still talking, something about tax deadlines, when the door behind me opened. I heard it before I turned. The sound of expensive shoes on thin carpet. The particular quiet that a certain kind of man brings into a room. The quiet of someone who is accustomed to arriving and having things stop. The man who walked in was perhaps 55. Lean, tan, dressed in a charcoal overcoat that cost more than the contents of Theodore Briggs's entire office. He had the face of someone who had been handsome 20 years ago and had spent the intervening decades making sure everyone remembered it. He looked at Briggs. Then he looked at me. He looked at me the way you look at a problem you expected to be smaller. "Victor Crane," he said, "I'm a developer. I have some interest in the Ashford Ridge parcel." Then the second man stepped through the door. Roland Fitch, deputy director of Harrow Hill Children's Home, the man who signed the transfer papers. Standing in a lawyer's office at 8:15 in the morning, less than 8 hours after I had walked out of the orphanage, next to a developer who wanted my land. I looked at his face. He looked at mine. A muscle moved in his jaw. Something cold and certain settled in my chest. I had no idea what it meant yet. But I knew, with the same instinct that had kept me alive for 12 years inside a place like Harrow Hill, that it meant something. And whatever it meant, I was not going to sign anything. Crane did not waste time on pleasantry. He pulled a chair from the corner of the room, positioned it directly across from me, sat down, and spoke as though the conversation were already over and he was simply narrating its conclusion. "The Ashford parcel is part of a corridor I've been assembling for a residential development," he said. "It's the last piece I need. Given the condition, the rock slide, the lack of access, the back taxes, I'm prepared to offer you $400. Cash, handled today. You walk out of here with money in your hand and no liability." He smiled. It was the smile of a man who has offered people money in moments of desperation many times and has never once been refused. $400, I said. He said, "Given the state of the property, that's generous. I think you know that." I looked at Fitch. Fitch was standing near the door with his hands clasped in front of him, looking at a spot on the wall slightly above my head. "Not at me. Carefully not at me." I said, "Mr. Fitch, I didn't expect to see you here." A pause. He looked at me briefly. Then back at the wall, he said, "Mr. Crane is an associate. I have an interest in the development going smoothly." "An interest," I said. Crane cut back in. He slid a document across Briggs's desk along with a pen. "Uncapped. Ready. Sign it today and the check clears by noon," he said. "I'd encourage you not to wait. The offer reflects current conditions. Those conditions change." I picked up the pen. I want to be honest, I almost signed it. $400 was not nothing. $400 was a week in a motel room. It was food. It was one night without the specific terror of having absolutely nothing. My fingers closed around the pen. And then I thought about Paulette, about her laugh, about the Saturday morning scrambled eggs, about the way Fitch had said closer to a distant relative who had come forward without looking up from his clipboard. I thought, why is the man who signed those transfer papers standing in this office? Why was he here before I arrived? How did he know I would be here this morning? Why does a developer who is assembling a residential corridor need the deputy director of an orphanage at his side when he makes an offer on 3 acres of rubble? I put the pen down. I said I need to think about it. Something moved behind Crane's eyes, fast and gone. He smiled again, slower this time. "Of course," he said, "take a day." He stood and buttoned his coat. But Nora, I'm going to be straightforward with you. That land has no value to anyone but me. Nobody else is going to come along, and the taxes aren't going to wait." He walked out. Fitch followed without a word. Briggs looked at me over his reading glasses. He said very quietly, "You don't have to decide today. I picked up the deed and put it in my coat." I said, "I know." I walked out into the morning and stood on the pavement and breathed the cold air. I did not know what I was doing yet. I only knew I was not signing that paper. Not until I understood why Roland Fitch needed me to. I spent the rest of that morning in the Drayfield Public Library. I used their computer to search for Victor Crane. He was easy to find. A regional developer based 2 counties over with a portfolio of luxury residential projects and a clean public record. News articles, ribbon cuttings, his face at Chamber of Commerce dinners. Nothing that explained Roland Fitch. I searched for my grandfather, Walter Calloway, Ashford Ridge, Drayfield. The results were sparse. A brief obituary: Walter Calloway, 74, lifelong resident of Drayfield, passed peacefully. Survived by 1 grandchild. No service. Then nothing, and then, buried on page 4 of a search result, a letter to the editor of the Drayfield County Courier from 11 years ago. I clicked on it. It was 1 paragraph. Formal, careful. The kind of writing of someone who knows they are not believed and is trying very hard to be believed anyway. It read, "I write to formally request that the Drayfield County Board of Supervisors open an independent investigation into placement practices at Harrow Hill Children's Home. I have reason to believe that a number of children transferred from this facility over the past several years have not been placed in legitimate care arrangements. I have documented my concerns and I am prepared to present evidence to the appropriate authorities. I ask only for someone to listen. Walter Calloway, Ashford Ridge." I read it 3 times. My grandfather had known. He had tried to tell someone. 11 years ago he had written a letter to the county board and asked for someone to listen. I thought about what Marin Voss had said the night before. He was, by all accounts, not entirely well. That was how they had silenced him. Not with threats, at least not only with threats. With reputation. With the steady, patient work of making a man seem unstable so that when he spoke, people heard noise instead of words. He had been watching them for years. He had documented his concerns. I thought about the cave, sealed since 1994, the year the rockslide happened. And where exactly did a man who knew too much and wasn't believed and lived alone on a ridge, where did a man like that put the things he needed to keep safe? Not in his house. A house can be searched. A house can be burned. You put it somewhere only you can reach. Somewhere everyone else has already written off as worthless. I closed the computer. I walked out of the library. I needed to get to Ashford Ridge. It took me 2 days and most of my $11 to arrange it. His name was Carl Demba, a retired construction worker in his late 60s who lived at the bottom of the Ridge Road and who agreed, after I explained my situation with total honesty, to spend an afternoon helping me look for a side entrance to a sealed cave in exchange for a handshake and whatever cash I could spare. He said, "Your grandfather used to wave at me from up on that ridge. Good man, kept to himself." He thought for a moment. He did mention once that he had a back way into that cave. Said the main entrance was the decoy. We found it 2 hours later. 30 feet south of the main collapse, behind a curtain of overgrown brush and a flat limestone slab that had been positioned, not by nature, but by hand to look like part of the hillside. Behind it a passage, narrow, low, reinforced with timber framing that was old but solid. Carl shone a torch in, then he looked at me. He said, "You sure?" I said, "Yes." The passage ran for about 40 feet before it opened into something else entirely. I want to describe it carefully because I know how it sounds. It was a room. Not large, perhaps 30 feet across, with a ceiling that rose to about 10 feet at the center. The walls were natural limestone, but the floor had been leveled and laid with wooden boards. Along the left wall, metal shelving, military style, laden with sealed plastic containers. Along the right wall, a folding table, a chair, a portable generator, and 3 large plastic drums of fuel. In the center of the room, bolted to the floor, a steel strongbox the size of a small trunk with a combination lock. And on the table, placed deliberately, oriented as if it had been left for someone to find, a single sealed envelope. My name was written on the front of it, not my full name, not Nora Calloway. Just Nora, in handwriting I had never seen before but recognized anyway, the way you recognize your own face in a photograph taken before you were born. My hands were shaking when I picked it up. I stood in the cold underground room that my grandfather had built by himself over years, in secret, against every attempt to dismiss and silence and discredit him. And I held the envelope my name was written on. I sat down in his chair, I opened it. The envelope contained 2 things. The first was a folded sheet of paper covered on both sides in my grandfather's handwriting, an index of everything on the shelves, 12 years of documentation. Dates, names, reference numbers, cross-referenced files, a meticulous, patient record of everything he had gathered and preserved. The second was a letter. 3 pages, handwritten, on the kind of cream paper you buy at a stationery shop when the occasion matters. It was from my mother. I will tell you what she wrote. Not all of it, some of it belongs only to me, but enough. She had written it 8 years ago, shortly before she disappeared. She had given it to my grandfather to keep. She had known what was coming, and she had written it down for me while she still had time. My darling Nora, if you are reading this, then you found your way to your grandfather's room, which means 2 things. That Walter kept his promise, and that you are braver than I ever knew how to ask you to be. I need to tell you why I am gone. It is not because I did not love you. I need you to hear that first and hold it above everything else that follows. There has not been a single day, not one, that I have not thought of you. You are the thing I hold when everything else goes dark. I was a caseworker for Drayfield County for 4 years. My job was to look after children in the care system, children like you, my love, although I did not know you were one of them yet when I began. My job was to make sure they were safe. In my 3rd year, I began to notice things that did not add up. Girls transferred without adequate paperwork, placements that could not be verified. A pattern of children, always girls, always without family connections, always the ones nobody would come looking for, who left the system and could not be traced afterward. I brought my concerns to my supervisor. My supervisor brought them to Roland Fitch. 2 weeks later, I was told my position had been eliminated due to budget restructuring. I kept investigating on my own. Your grandfather helped me. He had been watching Harrow Hill for years already. He had more than I had: names, dates, financial records, photographs. Together we built a case. We went to the county board. They did nothing. We went to the state. We were told our evidence was insufficient. Then Victor Crane's men came to the house. They did not hurt me. They didn't need to. They simply made very clear what would happen if I continued to me and to you. I was 8 years old when they showed me your photograph from inside Harrow Hill. I understood exactly what they meant. I left. I left so that you would be safe. I left knowing that Walter would keep the evidence, that he would keep this letter. That if there was any justice in this world, you would eventually find your way to this room, and you would understand. I am so sorry, Nora, for every day, for every birthday, for every time you needed me and I was not there. But I need you to understand what your grandfather kept in this room. It is everything. Names, payments, records going back 15 years. Proof of what Voss and Fitch and Crane have done to girls who had no one. Files that no courthouse could ignore. The combination to the strongbox is your birthday. 8:14. The year you were born. Take what is in this room, find someone who cannot be bought, and finish what we started. I love you without end and without condition. I love you across every year of silence. I love you more than they were ever able to take from me. Mom. I sat in the underground room on Ashford Ridge for a very long time after I finished reading. Carl Demba waited at the passage entrance. He did not come in. He did not call out. He simply waited. When I finally came back through the passage and stood in the cold evening air, he looked at my face and didn't ask any questions. He said, "You need anything?" I said, "I need to find a journalist." He thought for a moment. He said, "I know someone." Ada Reeves was 61 years old, recently retired from 30 years of investigative journalism, and lived in a house on Cutter Street that was so full of organized files, it looked less like a home and more like the inside of a very determined mind. She opened the door when Carl knocked, looked at the two of us, looked at the sealed plastic container of documents I was holding and said, "Come in. Coffee is on the stove. Do not sit on the pile of folders on the left chair, those are organized." She spent 4 hours going through what I had brought. She did not express shock. She read with the focused quiet of someone who has spent 30 years preparing for exactly this kind of document. Occasionally she made a small sound, not surprise, but recognition, as if she were seeing confirmation of something she had long suspected. When she finished, she set down the last folder and looked at me. She said, "This is the most complete private evidentiary record I have ever seen. Your grandfather was extraordinary." She paused. She said, "You know this could be dangerous." I said, "I know." She said, "Crane has money and he has people and he will not sit still once he realizes what you have." I said, "I know." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. The person she called was a federal agent named Dominic Osai, a 10-year veteran of a human trafficking task force who had been building a case in this region for 3 years and who had, Ada told me, been looking for exactly the kind of source documentation that was currently sitting on her kitchen table. He arrived the following afternoon. He was calm, methodical, and asked questions in the precise way of someone who already knows most of the answers and is verifying the ones they don't. After 2 hours, he closed his notebook and said, "Miss Calloway, the names in these files match active case records across 3 counties. The financial records corroborate wire transfer patterns we have been tracking for 4 years. This is," he chose his words carefully, "this is significant." He looked at the documents, then at me. He said, "Your grandfather tried to bring this forward 11 years ago." I said, "They called him unstable." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "He was right, and I am sorry it took this long." We had a plan within 48 hours. And then, on the second night, Victor Crane made his move. Carl had been staying near the ridge entrance as a precaution, his idea, offered without ceremony. He called me at 2 in the morning. He said, "There are 2 men on the ridge with equipment. They are not surveyors." Agent Osa had anticipated this. The original documents were already in federal custody. What was in the cave was a duplicate set, prepared specifically. Let them find it. Let them destroy it. Destruction of evidence on an active federal case carried its own consequences, but it told us something important. Crane knew. He was moving fast, which meant we needed to move faster. The wire was taped to my ribs. Agent Osai had attached it himself, quickly and professionally, in the back of the command vehicle parked half a mile down the ridge road. He had given me precise instructions. He had walked me through every scenario. He had looked at me before I got out of the vehicle and said, "You do not have to do this." I said, "I know." I got out. The message I had sent to Victor Crane the night before was simple. "I have been thinking about your offer. I would like to meet at the property to discuss the terms. I want to understand what the development plans are before I decide. 6 a.m. He had responded in 4 minutes. I will be there. I had sent a separate message to Maren Voss through the Harrow Hill administrative contact number I still had from my time as a resident. I told her I had found documents in the cave that related to the home's placement records, that I was confused about what I had found, and that I needed someone who understood the system to help me make sense of them. She arrived before Crane, which told me something about how closely they were communicating. She stepped out of her car in her navy blazer, clipboard absent for the first time in my memory, and walked toward me across the wet grass with her careful eyes moving over me like she was assessing a problem. She said, I understand you found some old records. I said, I found a lot of things in that cave. She said, your grandfather was a troubled man, Nora. He had deep suspicions about institutions he didn't understand. Whatever he wrote down, whatever he thought he was documenting, it was the product of a mind that was not well. I'm telling you this kindly. Don't make his mistakes. I looked at her. I thought about Paulette. I thought about 6 girls. I thought about my mother's letter, 3 pages of cream paper. I love you without end and without condition. I said, he documented 41 transfers over 12 years. He had financial records linking those transfers to a payment structure. He had photographs. He had names. Your name, Maren, Roland Fitch's name, Victor Crane's name, a silence. She said, you are 20 years old with no education, no money, and no family. Who do you think they will believe? I said, I think they'll believe the federal agent. Crane arrived 90 seconds later. Fitch was with him. The same navy jacket, the same careful hands, the same studied neutrality on his face. Crane took in the scene, Voss, me, the rubble of the cave entrance, and I watched him calculate. He said, let's be practical. You have documents. Documents can be contested. Chain of custody, provenance, interpretation. These things take years in court. I can make this simple. The offer is still open. I will raise it to $2,000. You take the money, you leave Drayfield, and this becomes someone else's problem. I said, Roland, tell me about Paulette. Fitch's face did not change, but his hands, which had been clasped in front of him, separated and fell to his sides. I said, Paulette Marsh, 14 years old, transferred November 2016. Tell me where she went. He said, placement records are confidential. I said, tell me who paid for her placement. Crane put a hand on Fitch's arm. He was looking at me with something that had moved past the campaign calculation into something colder and more direct. He said, whatever you think you know, you are in no position to. I said, Agent Osai, did you get that? The tree line on 3 sides of the ridge erupted 8 agents, moving in coordinated silence until they were not silent. Agent Dominic Osai walked out of the trees in his jacket and badge, unhurried, and said, Victor Crane, Maren Voss, Roland Fitch. Federal agents, do not move. Keep your hands where I can see them. Fitch sat down on the ground immediately. Not dramatically, just folded at the knees, hands out, like someone who had been waiting a long time to stop carrying something. Voss stood very still. Her expression did not change. She looked at me, a long, steady, unreadable look, and then she looked away and did not look at me again. Victor Crane took 1 step backward. An agent materialized at his left shoulder with a hand on his arm, and he stopped. He said, do you know who I am? The agent said, yes, sir. That's why we're here. I stood at the mouth of the cave and watched the 3 of them led, separately, toward federal vehicles. Crane passed within 10 feet of me on his way to the car. He turned his head and looked at me. He said, you have nothing. You are nothing. I said, my name is Nora Calloway. My mother tried to stop you. My grandfather spent 20 years documenting everything you did. I found it. He looked at me for 1 more second. Then the agent guided him forward and he was gone. I sat down on a rock at the cave entrance and I breathed the cold morning air. Somewhere in the trees, a bird began to sing. The sun came up over Ashford Ridge for the first time in what felt like my entire life. The strongbox combination was my birthday, 8/14. The year I was born. I opened it the morning after the arrests, with Agent Osai present as a witness. Inside, 17 bound bundles of documents, a sealed evidence log in my grandfather's handwriting, 4 external hard drives wrapped in foam, and at the very bottom, separated from everything else, wrapped in cloth, gold and silver coins, collected over decades, and beneath them, a cashier's check made out to Nora Calloway, dated 3 weeks before my grandfather's death, drawn on an account in a bank 2 counties over. The amount was $412,000. My grandfather had spent 20 years quietly, carefully, converting his assets, land sales, a small inheritance of his own, decades of frugal living, into something nobody could seize. Something that could not be taxed or traced or dismissed, something sealed in the dark and waiting for me. He had never stopped believing I would come. I sat on the floor of that underground room with the check in my hands, and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was 8 years old, and did not understand, yet that crying does not bring people back. This time I understood exactly what I was crying for. I was crying because he had loved me before I ever knew him. I was crying because my mother had loved me through 12 years of silence. I was crying because I had found them, finally, in a sealed room under a mountain that everyone had agreed was worthless. Victor Crane was convicted on 44 counts, including conspiracy, human trafficking, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 26 years. He was 58 years old at sentencing. Maren Voss was convicted on 38 counts. She was sentenced to 22 years. The Rotary Club did not comment. Roland Fitch pleaded guilty before the trial began and testified in full. The prosecutor described his testimony as detailed, corroborated, and devastating. He received a reduced sentence in exchange. He cried on the stand for 3 hours. Of the girls documented in my grandfather's files, 29 were located. 19 were connected to federal victim services. Some had built their own lives and were not identified publicly. Some were still being found when this story went to press. Paulette Marsh was one of the 19. I will not tell you her story, that is hers to tell, but I will tell you that she is alive, and that she has a daughter, and that her daughter has a name. Her daughter's middle name is Clara. She named her after my mother. My mother had not disappeared. She had done what she believed was the only thing that would keep me safe. She had gone somewhere they could watch her, so that they would have no reason to reach for me. She had traded 12 years of her own life to keep me in the world. When Crane's network was dismantled, the arrangement that had kept her contained collapsed with it. Agent Osai found her through the investigation's financial records. She was living under a different name in a city 400 miles away. She had a job, a small apartment. A photograph of me, age 8, that she had kept in the lining of her coat for 12 years. I drove to her on a Thursday in April. I won't describe it. Some things are not stories. Some things are just life, suddenly returned. She came back to Drayfield. She is there now. The first thing I did with my grandfather's money, before the apartment, before the lawyer, before anything for myself, was buy Harrow Hill. The county sold it without ceremony. The board was not in a position to attach conditions. I walked through the building with my mother on a Tuesday afternoon in October, exactly 1 year after Maren Voss had handed me a garbage bag and laughed at my inheritance. We walked through every room, the dormitories, the kitchen where Paulette used to make scrambled eggs on Saturday mornings, the lobby with the photograph of the Rotary Club award. I took the photograph down myself. The renovation took 8 months. Knew everything: beds, windows, heating, the garden that the older kids used to tend under obligation, and that now they tend because they want to. The sign over the gate no longer says Harrow Hill Children's Home. It says Callaway House, a home for young women, run with the belief that every girl deserves someone in her corner. No exceptions. No conditions. No one left behind. My mother runs the counseling program on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Carl Demba fixes things when they break, which he does for free and without being asked. Ada Reeves comes in on Fridays and teaches a journalism class to the older residents. Agent Ose visited once, on a Saturday, and spent an hour in the garden looking at the oak trees. He said he thought my grandfather would have approved. I think so too. They handed me a garbage bag and a deed to a worthless cave. They did it because they thought I was nothing. A system kid. A girl with no family, no money, no one watching out for her. They did it because they had spent 15 years building a world where certain people simply did not matter, where certain girls could disappear and nobody would come looking, and they had no reason to believe that one of those girls would ever come back for them. That belief was the crack in the foundation. That belief is always the crack in the foundation. My grandfather knew it. He built his entire plan around it. He hid the evidence in the one place they had already dismissed. He put it in the worthless cave. He put it somewhere they were certain contained nothing of value. Because that is where the powerful always make their mistake. They decide what is worthless. They decide who is nothing. And in doing so, they leave their most dangerous enemy standing right in front of them, holding a deed, while they laugh. I was 20 years old with $11 and a garbage bag. I was the most dangerous person in Drayfield. They just didn't know it yet. If you are someone who has ever been handed a garbage bag, if you are someone who has ever been told that what they left you is worthless, if you are someone who has been dismissed or discarded or written off by people who were absolutely certain they were right to do it, go to the cave. Open the door. Read the letter. What was buried for you is still there. It is waiting. And the people who buried it are counting on you never going to find it. That is your advantage. Use it. If Nora's story moved you, if it reminded you that the ones they overlook are often the ones who change everything, please share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Like and subscribe for more true spirit stories of resilience, justice, and ordinary people who refuse to stay buried.